Welcome to Silent Screams, where fear takes root in the quietest of places. Tonight, you'll find yourself inside a room that carries with it a dark history, one that may never allow you to leave. This is the story of Room 401, where the restless spirit of Lord Dunraven still lingers, forever trapped in the echo of his tragic past. It's a tale of strange phenomena, inexplicable events, and an overwhelming sense of dread that clings to the very walls. There's a truth in Room 401, one that may leave you questioning what is real and what is simply the product of a tormented mind. As the clock ticks, the night grows darker, and you're drawn into a world where the supernatural reigns. Don't expect the ordinary. What you're about to hear isn't. I arrived at the old hotel just after dusk. The sky had already turned an eerie shade of violet, the kind of color that only appears when something unnatural is at play. The air was thick with humidity, and the streets seemed unusually empty for a town that usually bustled with tourists. I checked into the hotel, a place that seemed ordinary enough at first glance, paint peeling from the walls, a musty smell in the lobby, but there was something about it. Something off. A feeling I couldn't quite shake. When the receptionist handed me the key to Room 401, her hands trembled just slightly. I noticed it immediately, but she quickly covered it up with a forced smile. Room 401, she said in a voice that barely above a whisper, is a bit special. But it's still available for guests. It's nothing, really. Just a bit of history. She didn't elaborate. I didn't think much of it at the time. I just smiled back, thinking perhaps she was just tired or overworked. What I didn't know is that Room 401 had been the site of a gruesome event over a century ago. Lord Dunraven, a nobleman with a dark past, had met his untimely demise there, but his death was no simple accident. Some say he was murdered, others believe it was a suicide. Regardless of the truth, his death marked the beginning of the room's curse. Ever since, those who dared to spend the night have experienced terrifying phenomena, some of them so disturbing that no one has dared to stay in Room 401 for more than one night. I didn't know any of this when I first checked in. All I knew was that the room was mine for the night. But by the time I made my way down the narrow hall to Room 401, I felt an unease that I couldn't explain. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, the faintest sound echoing in the stillness of the hotel. My footsteps seemed louder than usual, unnaturally loud. When I reached the door, the number 401 gleamed in tarnished gold. The door itself was ancient, wooden, and scratched as if someone, or something, had clawed at it over the years. I unlocked the door and entered the room, only to be met with a wave of cold air. The temperature dropped sharply, a biting chill that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The room was large, furnished in an old-fashioned style, but there was something oppressive about it. The wallpaper was faded, the bed covered in sheets that looked as though they hadn't been touched in decades. I moved toward the bed, the air growing colder with every step. My breath fogged in the air, and I instinctively pulled my coat tighter around me. As I sat down on the edge of the bed, I noticed the window was cracked slightly open, despite the chill in the air. I closed it, but as soon as I did, I felt something shift behind me. It was as though the room had changed in an instant. The air seemed heavier, thicker. I couldn't explain it, but it felt as if something was watching me. I stood up, glancing around the room. The furniture was old. Yes, but it was positioned strangely. The chair in the corner of the room faced the wall, as if it had been placed there deliberately to block the view of the room. I decided to explore a little, curious about the oddities of the room. But as I walked toward the chair, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The air was thick with tension, and for a moment, I thought I heard something, whispers, faint and indistinct, as though they were coming from just beyond the walls. But when I turned toward the door, I saw it. A shadow. It was moving across the far wall, faint and dark, like a figure walking just out of view. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. It wasn't the flickering light playing tricks on my eyes. No, this was something else entirely. I wasn't alone. I took a few tentative steps forward, my eyes locked on the shadow as it grew more distinct. It had the shape of a man, tall, thin, but the figure was distorted, its limbs elongating unnaturally. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was tight, constricted as if something was choking me from the inside. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, the shadow vanished. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, unable to move. My mind raced, my pulse thundering in my ears. Was I seeing things? Had my mind already started to play tricks on me from the isolation and the strange atmosphere? I didn't know what to believe anymore. But the feeling in the room had changed. It was no longer simply cold, it was suffocating. Like an invisible force was closing in on me, wrapping around me, pulling me deeper into something I couldn't escape. I turned back toward the bed, hoping to find some sense of normalcy, some grounding. But when I did, my blood ran cold. The sheets were no longer still. They were moving. They were shifting, as though something, or someone, was underneath them. The movement was slow at first, almost imperceptible, but then it became more pronounced. I took a step back, fear crawling up my spine as the sheets began to rise in a slow, deliberate fashion. A figure was emerging from beneath the covers, its form pale and ghostly, shrouded in the very air of the room itself. I couldn't see its face at first, but I could feel its eyes on me, cold, judging, hungry. I wanted to run, but my legs were frozen in place. The figure rose slowly, its form becoming clearer, until I saw it in full. Lord Dunraven. His face was gaunt, twisted in a permanent grimace of pain and torment. His clothes were tattered, as though he had been trapped in this moment for eternity. His eyes, however, were the most chilling aspect. They were empty, dark holes that seemed to devour the very light around them. And then, in a voice that was both a whisper and a scream, I heard it. "Why are you here?" The words were chilling, as if they were not meant for me, but for someone, anyone, who dared to enter this cursed room. I tried to speak, but the words died in my throat. The air around me grew colder, the temperature dropping so low that I could see my breath condensing in front of me, each exhale clouding the space with white fog. Lord Dunraven's ghost took a step forward, and I instinctively took a step back. He wasn't done yet. As he reached out toward me, I saw his hand, long, bony fingers reaching for my throat. His fingers didn't just move toward me, they glided, as though floating through the air, his grip tightening around my neck. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't scream. I could only feel the suffocating grip of his ghostly hand slowly tightening, pulling me closer to him. The room spun. The walls warping, and I was falling deeper into the darkness that surrounded Lord Dunraven. Was this my fate now? Would I, too, become one of the restless souls trapped in this room? Or was there still a way out? But before I could find the answer, the lights flickered. And then everything went black. And that's where it ends, for now. The silence that followed the blackout was suffocating. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was the absence of life. For a moment, I was suspended in a place between waking and dreaming, as if the very fabric of reality had unraveled around me. My heart was still racing, thundering in my chest, and my breath came in shallow gasps, but I could see nothing. The darkness was absolute. The kind of darkness that felt alive, breathing, pressing in from all sides. I don't know how long I lay there in that stifling blackness. Time lost all meaning. I strained to hear anything, footsteps, whispers, anything that could reassure me that I was still alive, still in the realm of the living. But there was nothing. The only sound was the rushing of blood in my ears, and the faint, persistent hum of the hotel's old air conditioning system somewhere far off. But then, I heard it. A soft sound at first, like the rustling of fabric. It was faint, barely perceptible. And then it grew louder, closer. As if something, or someone, was moving toward me. Slowly. Methodically. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel it, the presence in the room. I wasn't alone. I didn't dare move. I couldn't. My body refused to obey, frozen in terror as I listened intently to the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps moving toward me in the dark. The figure of Lord Dunraven was still with me. I knew it. I could feel his cold, oppressive presence bearing down on me, even if I couldn't see him. The rustling sound grew louder. The air grew colder still, a biting chill that seemed to seep into my very bones. And then, through the darkness, I saw it. A faint glow. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. A trick of the light, perhaps, or the after effects of the blackout. But no, this was real. A soft, sickly greenish light, like the glow of a decaying corpse, appeared in the far corner of the room. I blinked. The glow intensified, pulsing, shimmering in the air. It seemed to be coming from the corner where the bed met the wall, where the floorboards creaked under the weight of something moving. But I couldn't see it. Not yet. The glow grew brighter, and in that moment, I realized the truth. There was something there. Something rising. A shape. A figure. At first, it was just a silhouette, its edges blurry and indistinct, like smoke rising from the floor. But as the greenish light grew stronger, the shape became clearer. I saw the outline of a man. A tall, gaunt figure, standing just beyond the bed, its face obscured in shadow. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt tight, as though something invisible was pressing against me. My heart pounded, and my mind screamed at me to run, to flee from the room, from this place of pure malice, but my legs wouldn't move. I was paralyzed. The figure stepped forward, and the room seemed to grow colder still. The temperature dropped so low that I could see my breath fogging in front of me, the air thick with an unnatural chill. It moved like a wisp of smoke, slowly, deliberately, as though it was savoring every moment of my fear. And then, in a voice that was both distant and immediate, I heard it. "Why are you still here?" It wasn't the same voice I'd heard before. This voice was deeper, more guttural, as if it came from the very bowels of the earth. It echoed in my skull, vibrating with an intensity that rattled my bones. It didn't sound human, not entirely. It was something older, something twisted. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But all I could do was whisper, barely able to force the words out. I didn't know. I didn't mean to disturb you." The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it tilted its head to the side, its movements unnaturally fluid. A sound, low, almost imperceptible, emitted from its form. A low, disjointed laugh, full of suffering and malice. It sent a shiver down my spine. "You disturb me?" The voice was mocking now, cruel. "No. You are the disturbance. You are the one who has come into my world." The figure stepped closer, and I felt it, a cold breath on the back of my neck, so cold that it seemed to freeze my very soul. It was as if I could feel it breathing down my spine, its presence wrapping around me, tightening like a noose. I tried to turn, to break free from the invisible grip that held me in place, but my body refused to respond. My legs felt like lead, my arms useless at my sides. The figure reached out with one long, skeletal hand. It was then that I saw it. The hand was not human. Its fingers were elongated, sharp, gnarled like the branches of an ancient tree. The nails were blackened, curved like claws, and there was something wrong about them. They weren't simply reaching for me, they were reaching into me. I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through my body as the hand brushed against my skin. It was like being struck by lightning, sharp, painful, but something else too. Something far more sinister. The hand recoiled for a moment, and I heard a low growl emanating from the figure. The growl wasn't just a sound. It was a vibration, a rumble that seemed to shake the very air around me. "You don't belong here," it said, its voice now a guttural snarl. "This is my domain. My prison. My eternity." And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure seemed to dissipate. The light flickered and went out, plunging the room back into pitch-black darkness. For a moment, I thought I was alone again. But I was wrong. I could still feel the presence. That weight in the air. The suffocating pressure that had been building since I stepped into this cursed room. It wasn't gone. Not by a long shot. I gasped for breath, my lungs burning as though I had been holding my breath for far too long. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't. But the door, my escape, was locked. I could hear it, faintly, rattling in the silence of the room. The soft jingle of the old brass key turning inside the lock, as if something, or someone, was holding it closed from the other side. I pulled at the handle, desperately trying to force it open, but it was no use. The door wouldn't budge. I was trapped. The walls seemed to close in around me, suffocating me with their presence. My hands were slick with sweat, my mind racing as I fumbled for a way out, any way out. And then, through the terror, through the panic, I heard it again. A voice. It was faint, at first, a whisper, so soft it could have been my imagination. But then it grew louder, more distinct. And the words made my blood run cold. Lord Dunraven. It wasn't the figure. It wasn't the thing in the corner of the room. It was something else. Someone else. Lord Dunraven, the voice repeated, louder now, more insistent. Why do you torment them so? The voice was neither male nor female. It was ancient, hollow, as if it had been dragged through time and suffering. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It seemed to come from everywhere. The temperature dropped again. A deep, biting cold that made my teeth ache. The whispering grew louder, swirling around me, until it was a cacophony of voices, each one calling out Lord Dunraven's name, pleading, begging for something. But I couldn't understand the words. They were garbled, twisted, as if the voices were being pulled from some dark, forgotten place. Suddenly, the light flickered. Once more. And then, the door opened. But it wasn't the door I had tried to open. No. It was the window. The old, cracked window, which had been sealed tight moments ago, now creaked open with a force I couldn't explain. The wind rushed in, wild, cold, unnatural, and I could see something through the window. A figure. A shadow standing just outside the room, on the balcony, gazing up at me. And I knew, without a doubt, that it wasn't Lord Dunraven. It was something else. Something darker. The shadow raised a hand, slowly, deliberately. And just like that, the room grew even colder. The darkness deepened. I was no longer sure of anything. I was no longer sure if I was in the real world anymore, or if I had slipped into the realm of the dead. Then, I felt it. A tug. A pull. Something was pulling me, dragging me toward the window, pulling me toward the shadows. The last thing I saw before everything went black again was Lord Dunraven's face, distorted and twisted in agony. And then nothing. The blackness that followed was endless, suffocating, an abyss where time and space seemed to disappear. I couldn't tell if I was awake or dreaming, if I was alive or dead. It was as though I had been swallowed whole by the very room itself, the walls closing in with an unnatural weight that pressed down on me from all sides. My mind screamed for escape, but my body was numb, paralyzed. I was no longer sure where I was. The floor beneath me, once solid and real, now felt as though it was shifting, unstable. The temperature was frigid, colder than anything I had ever felt before, as if the very air was freezing around me. I could hear something, faint at first, whispers. But these were no ordinary whispers. They were layered, twisted, overlapping, as if thousands of voices were speaking all at once, pulling at my mind, trying to drag me deeper into the void. I tried to move, to lift my arms, but my body refused to respond. It was as if I was trapped in a dream I couldn't wake from, bound to the room, to the cursed place where the boundaries between the living and the dead no longer existed. And then, the whispers changed. They became clearer, more distinct. Lord Dunraven. Lord Dunraven. The voices were calling to him. But there was no answer. Not from him, and not from anyone else. It was as though the room itself had swallowed everything up, leaving nothing but the sound of those terrible whispers. The darkness around me began to shift, like smoke swirling in the air. The temperature dropped even lower, a biting cold that seemed to pierce straight through my flesh and into my bones. I could feel it now, something watching me. The presence was unmistakable. A weight in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was as though the room itself had become alive, feeding off my fear, growing stronger with every passing moment. I wanted to scream, to shout, to cry out for help, but my throat was dry, my words caught in my chest. I tried to force my body to move, to open my eyes, but it was as though something invisible was holding me down, pinning me to the spot where I stood. And then, slowly, the shadows began to form. At first, it was just a vague shape, an indistinct figure, moving in the corner of my vision. But it was growing. The shape was taking form, becoming more solid, more real with each passing second. I could feel the presence growing stronger, more intense, as if something was stepping into the room with me, something that didn't belong in the world of the living. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was watch as the shape became clearer. It was a figure, tall, gaunt, and twisted. Its features were indistinct at first, but slowly, they came into focus. The face that emerged from the darkness was pale, sickly, as if it had been drained of all color, all life. The eyes were hollow, blackened pits that seemed to swallow the light around them. They stared at me with a coldness that froze my very soul. There was a hunger in those eyes, a darkness that seemed to seep into the very air, making it thick, heavy, suffocating. And then, the figure spoke. "You should not have come here." The voice was low, guttural, as if it came from deep within the earth itself. It was a voice that echoed in my bones, vibrating with an energy I couldn't comprehend. It wasn't just a voice, it was an entity, something ancient and terrible, something that had existed long before I was born, long before this cursed room had ever been inhabited. The figure moved closer, and as it did, the temperature in the room dropped even further, until the air itself seemed to crystallize. My breath came in short, panicked gasps, each exhale forming a cloud of mist in front of me. The shadows seemed to reach out, curling around me like cold, skeletal fingers. The figure's hand shot out, and before I could react, it grabbed me by the throat. Its grip was icy, unnatural, like the hand of death itself. The coldness seeped into my skin, spreading throughout my body, paralyzing me from the inside out. I tried to scream, but the sound caught in my throat, muffled, trapped. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "Why do you disturb me?" The figure's voice was a hiss, a serpent's whisper that sent chills crawling up my spine. "You, who dare enter my domain? What is it that you seek? What are you looking for in this cursed place?" I couldn't answer. My mind was racing, but the words wouldn't form. What did it want from me? What had I done to deserve this torment? But before I could even try to comprehend, the figure dragged me toward it, pulling me closer, lifting me off the ground as though I weighed nothing. The air around me seemed to warp, the shadows twisting and bending in unnatural ways. Suddenly, the room shifted again. The walls seemed to bend, twisting into grotesque shapes. The floor was no longer solid beneath my feet. It felt like I was floating, suspended in an endless void. The figure's grip on my throat tightened, and I felt the darkness closing in around me, smothering me with its suffocating presence. "You cannot escape," the figure whispered, its voice now laced with a venomous edge. "You will never leave this place. You will never leave me." The shadows seemed to grow, expanding until they enveloped the entire room. The figure's face was now inches from mine, its hollow eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my heart pound in my chest. I could feel its cold breath on my skin, feel the icy chill seep into my bones. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged, sharp teeth, each one gleaming in the sickly greenish light that now filled the room. I tried to fight, tried to pull away, but it was futile. The figure was too strong. It was everywhere, inside my head, inside my very soul. Its presence was consuming me, erasing everything that was real, leaving only the darkness behind. And then, in an instant, everything stopped. The figure released its grip on me, and I fell to the ground with a thud. My body was numb, weak, as if I had been drained of all strength. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The room was silent now, eerily still. But that silence was worse than any sound. It was the silence of something waiting for me to break, to give in to the terror that lurked in the shadows. For a moment, I thought I was free, that the nightmare had ended. But when I looked up, I saw it. The shadows were no longer confined to the corners of the room. They were moving, swirling, converging toward the center. The air grew thick again, and the temperature plummeted. I could feel the oppressive weight of the darkness pressing down on me, suffocating me, squeezing the life out of me. And then, a voice. But this time, it wasn't the figure's voice. It was a different voice, soft, insistent, whispering my name. "Come." I turned toward the sound, my heart racing in my chest. The shadows seemed to part, just enough for me to see what lay ahead. It was a door I hadn't seen before, standing in the center of the room. Its edges were jagged, as though it had been hacked together from the very bones of the hotel itself. The wood was dark and rotting, covered in thick, black vines that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The voice came again, calling me. "Come, enter." My instincts screamed at me to run, to stay away. But something inside me compelled me to move toward the door. The darkness was pulling me in, dragging me toward it, as though the room itself wanted me to open it, to see what lay behind. I couldn't stop myself. Step by step, I moved closer to the door. The whispers in the room grew louder, swirling around me, drowning out everything else. The temperature had dropped so low that my breath was now visible in the freezing air. The vines on the door writhed, twisting like serpents, reaching out for me. But I couldn't turn back. I reached for the door, my hand trembling as I touched the cold, rotting wood. The moment my fingers made contact, the whispers stopped. A terrible silence fell over the room, and for a moment, I thought I had made a mistake. But then, the door creaked open. A gust of wind rushed out from behind it, cold and damp, carrying with it the smell of decay, of something ancient and forgotten. The shadows inside the door stretched out toward me, like fingers reaching from the dark. And beyond the door, I saw it. A room. But not just any room. A room that wasn't part of the hotel at all. It was another place. A place of darkness, where time had no meaning, where the walls were covered in bloodstains, where the air was thick with the scent of death. And there, in the center of the room, stood Lord Dunraven. He was no longer a figure of flesh and blood. He was something else, something twisted, something monstrous. His form was distorted, grotesque, as though he had been pulled apart and remade by the very forces of hell itself. His eyes were blackened pits, empty, void of any trace of humanity. But his mouth twisted into a smile. A smile that was more a grimace, a mockery of joy. And I knew, in that moment, that I had just crossed the threshold. There was no turning back now. I had entered his domain. And now, he owned me.